this video we're going to look at sequencing, otherwise known as the order that the work has to be done in. And so the idea of 6.3 sequence activities is to identify and document relationships between work packages. Now it may be done at activity level, but we're going to do it at work package level. So remember, activities are where you take these and break them up. So you take a work package and break it down into, say, construct foundation, compact foundation, all those sort of things. As I said before, usually construction with medium-sized engineering projects, we just work at work package level. So the inputs are the work packages, so or activities, or depending on which way you're doing it. You could have a mix. There might be one of these work packages that you haven't done before, you don't really have experience in, so you might break that down into activities to give yourself an accurate sequencing, but also for determining the resources and determining the duration. So you can mix them up, you can mix the work packages and activities up. But in this case we've just got the work packages. And then for each work package, the dependency. In other words, what has to happen first and what has to happen afterwards. So building the walls is obviously a predecessor, and the successor is building the roof on top of the walls. And the last thing you need to consider is milestones. Now these are points in the project program where you bring it all together. So for example, if you're building a building, you might say a milestone is floor completed by this milestone, and then the next one might be first level completed, second level completed, whatever. Okay, so it's a good idea to put milestones into the structure of the program, because it brings all of the work packages together. So when everything's going along, there's could be 3 or it could be dozens of work packages all happening at the same time, and it's very hard to determine where you're at. Are we ahead of time or are we behind time? If you have some milestones, if you can bring them all together into milestones, like we've completed the first floor, now we're going on to the second, then you're able to better track it. So you can say we plan to complete the first floor by the 22nd of April. Okay, so then you can look at that milestone and say, have we achieved that or not? So milestones are these points where you can actually see whether you are the whole thing is coming together as planned or not. So work packages, dependencies, milestones, you consider all of those and put together the precedence diagram. So we're going to look at precedence diagrams in a little bit more detail later on, but first let's look at dependencies. Now the dependency is the order in which activities need to proceed, and there's normally a predecessor and a successor. So the predecessor is the activity that needs to happen before the successor, and the successor is the activity that happens after. So for example, building a house, the walls might be a predecessor activity to the roof laying, which would be a successor. Now notice that the floor, laying the floor, would be a predecessor to the walls being laid, being constructed. So every activity is usually a predecessor and a successor, and you can have multiple predecessors for an activity, or you can have multiple successors. Every work package should have at least one predecessor and one successor, the only exceptions being the first activity and the last activity. Obviously the first activity can't have a predecessor because it's already, there's nothing before it, and the final activity can't have a successor because there's nothing after it. But everything else should have one predecessor and one successor at least. It can have multiple. Now the types of dependencies, mandatory dependencies. Now these are the physical nature of the works. So the example we looked at before, you have to build the walls before you build the roof on top of the walls. So that is the nature of the work. You have to erect the formwork before you pour the concrete. So that's a mandatory dependency, it's the nature of the work. Now there may be other reasons for putting in a dependency relationship, and discretionary, which is defined by the project team. So for example, you might have a long road or a large area of earthworks, and you only want to do one section at a time. You want to split it into 3 or 4 little sections. So you might say, well, we're going to do area, so in this case given here, we're going to do area A, this area here, and when we finish area A, when we've done the earthworks and we put the topsoil back on again, we're going to open up area B, and then when we finish area B, we're going to open up area C. So that's not the physical nature. They could all be done together if you wanted to, but the discretionary dependency. Now it might be that you're limited on resources, or you want to reduce the amount of open area to restrict the environmental damage. So there's lots of good reasons why you would put in a discretionary dependency. Another dependency is an external dependency. It's driven by external parties. So that's usually when they can supply their services or supply their materials. So a subcontractor may not be able to come on site until April, whereas you'd like them to come in on March. So you'd need to rejig the works to match that. Another good example is if you're building a pump station, you might need special pumps from Germany. It takes 6 months for them to build it, commission it, and ship it over. So you need to restructure you need to structure the program or the sequence so that to allow for the fact that the pumps are going to come later. It might be that ideally you'd be putting them in April, but they're not going to arrive until June. So you put them in then and you restructure the activities around it. Another one, the last one, is internal dependencies. So this is within your organization, and that might be, it's usually resources. So it might be that you need to have the drainage team in the first week in March, but you find out that another project's got them until the middle of March. So you need to restructure your activities, your work packages, to allow for the fact that the drainage team's not going to be available until that particular time. So there's a lot of that goes on. You do not have, it's very rare for you to have unlimited resources, and you need to work in with other projects within your organisation, other projects within Auckland. So for example, there's only about 3 or 4 heavy lift cranes in Auckland. So if you want to do some heavy lifting, you need to book them long time in advance, and you might need to schedule your work to work around when that crane is going to become available. So it's not just internal dependencies, it's external as well. So dependency relationships, really the one you should use is finish to start. So the predecessor finishes, the successor starts. Now that's not to say that the predecessor couldn't be part of the way through when the successor starts. Okay, so you can have a lead in there, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But that relationship where there's a predecessor and a successor, and the relationship is from finish to start. Now you can have finish to finish, where the successor can't finish before the predecessor finishes. So that might be an example of building a wall. So the predecessor might be building the wall, the successor might be painting the wall. So you could be, so obviously you can't paint the wall until the predecessor is finished. Start to start, the successor cannot start before the predecessor starts. And start to finish, the successor cannot finish before the predecessor starts. And so there are situations where those sort of relationships would be suitable, but at our level, let's just work with the finish to start, because these ones put all sorts of complications in. But as you get more advanced, you may well use these other dependency relationships. I mentioned lead and lag. So looking at our finish to start relationship here, the lag is a delay in the successor activity. So the successor activity cannot start immediately after the predecessor is finished. In this case here, you're pouring a concrete floor. Now you need that floor to harden before you start building the walls on top. Otherwise the work in putting the walls in might crack the concrete floor because it hasn't reached its full strength. So you would have, say, a 5-day delay. So you pour the concrete floor, and then 5 days later you start on the wall construction. Now that is called a lag. The opposite of that is a lead. So that successor activity can start before the predecessor activity finishes. So for example, if you're building a portal frame building and it's got about 12 or 20 portal frames, after the first 4 or 5 portal frames have been erected and braced, then you could probably come along and start putting the purlins in for the roof. So you might have one crew going along putting the portal frame up. When they get to the 4th or 5th portal frame, you start another crew putting the roof up. So the portal frame crew will go along and just keep on putting the portal frames up, and the roofing crew will follow along behind them. Now the advantage of a lead is it allows you to reduce the amount of time the project takes, and so one of our objective for time management is to bring the project in on time, and if you can reduce the amount of time it takes to do activities by putting in lead, for example, then that is a good way of reducing the time it takes to do the project and making it more likely that you're going to bring your project in on time. And so all of those things all go together to form the precedence diagram, and this is what a precedence diagram looks like. It is a type of network diagram. If you're reading other books, it is an activity on node type of network diagram. There are other type of network diagram is an activity on arrow. Now that was used in the old days because it was easier to manually calculate the precedence diagram, but nowadays, easier to calculate the network diagram, but nowadays with computers and stuff, the calculation is done automatically, and Microsoft and all the modern packages use activity on nodes. This is the one we're using. So what this does is it shows us a really good overview of the sequence and the relationship between each one of the work packages. So for example, we know that item 1.2, road formation, or work package 1.2, cannot start until the curb and channel has been laid. So that's a successor, and the curb and channel is the predecessor. So curb and channel is a predecessor to 1.2 road formation. Road formation in turn is a predecessor to 1.3, which is the markings. So 1.3 can't start before the road formation goes. Notice that the project start is a predecessor for both curb and channel and the footpath. So you can have more than one successor for one work package. Likewise, 1.3 markings and 2.3 planting are both predecessors for project finish. So you can have two predecessors, or three or four, how many you want, for one work package. But each one of these ones, apart from the start and the finish, each one has at least one predecessor and one successor. Now the other thing to note is that 2.2 driveways is not related to 1.1 curb and channel. So the 2.2 driveways can actually go ahead even if 1.1 curb and channel is not completed or hasn't even been started, because there's no dependency relationship between these two activities. So you can see that the precedence diagram provides a really quick and easy way of seeing how all of the work packages are related, what sequence they need to go in, and so on.